So I'll first let Pedram introduce the structure for the event for today, and then I will introduce Dr. Das.
Sounds good. All right, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I guess a good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining from. We're really glad to see you here, and it is our utmost pleasure and honor to have Professor Sonia Das joining us today on what is going to be a phenomenal lecture, which I'm personally really excited about, and I'm sure you all are. So with respect to the structure, it's going to be a very simple afternoon, evening for us today. We're basically going to invite Dr. Das to give us a lecture, and then afterwards we're going to basically open up the floor to any questions you may have, and it'll be really good to actually engage in the discussions through mic. So you're more than welcome to at the Q&A session to open up your mic, answer or ask any questions you have, and get the discussions going. So yeah, so without further ado, I'll pass it on to someone and to introduce Professor Das.
Great. So this might be a little bit long, but I'll try to make it shorter. So surely Dr. Sonia Das doesn't need any introduction, but for the sake of formality, we'll go ahead with it. So Professor Sonia Das is a neurosurgeon and scientist at St. Michael's Hospital and the Hospital for Sick Kids, and an associate professor in the Department of Surgery at the University of Toronto. He currently serves as the CNS Tumours Lead at Ontario Health. Dr. Das has a very interesting background. He studied English literature at the University of Michigan Ann Arbor and has obtained a master in philosophy at Harvard University before entering medical school in Chicago at Northwestern. He completed his doctoral studies in neurobiology at the NIH, where he studied the molecular processes that underlie adult neurogenesis in the lab of Dr. ZuHang Sheng. He then returned to Chicago to complete his neurosurgical residency, during which time he began work on cancer stem cells and primary brain tumors in the lab of Dr. John Kessler. He was recruited to the University of Toronto in 2010. His clinical practice is focused on the care of patients with benign and malignant brain tumors. His laboratory in the Arthur and Sonia Labatt Brain Tumor Center at the Hospital for Sick Kids focuses on the molecular and genetic mechanisms that regulate cellular plasticity, fate specification, and treatment resistance in glioblastoma. His research group at the ZuHang Sheng Knowledge Institute is focused on using real-world data and meta-analysis for knowledge translation. His work has been published in many high-impact journals, including Nature, Nature Genetics, Cell Stem Cell, Cancer Cell, JAMA, JAMA Neurology, New England Journal of Medicine, you name it. In 2017, Dr. Das joined the Center for Ethics at the University of Toronto. His work at the Center for Ethics focuses on the interface of artificial intelligence with medicine, issues that underlie professional identity in medical practice, and the ethics of surgical innovation. And he was recently named a senior fellow at Massey College. So without further ado, we would like to introduce the Renaissance man par excellence, Dr. Sonia, to deliver the lecture today.
Thanks, Simon. Do I actually have to give a talk after that introduction? Is that? Well, thank you. Thanks. Thanks to Cameron for the introduction, and to all of you for spending some time with me this evening or this afternoon. So I'll tell you that Pedram, Mohammed, and Saman approached me a few months ago and asked if I could join all of you. And my immediate thought was to give a talk about my research and what it is that my research group does. And as we talked a little bit more, I found myself wondering whether or not, particularly given where many of you are in your lives and the questions I was asking when I was where you guys are, and that I thought of as so critical when I was in your place, I thought instead that I would do something perhaps a little more diffuse and less typical, and speak with you about something I think broader than my research. You can see the title of my talk here, and I will hope, I think it'll take me about 35-40 minutes. Hopefully by the end of it, it will make sense why it is that I chose this title, and won't feel melodramatic that I took it on the way that I did. I'm going to start with a few quotes. And I'm sharing these because they're ones that I have found instructive for myself, and that I found self-declarative. In other words, they're things that have somehow resonated with me in a way that has made sense of how I understand myself as a human being and how I understand my place in the world as a neurosurgeon. And I'll say, I've put neurosurgeon in the title here. It could have very easily have been something else. And I don't want you to walk away from this talk thinking that I'm saying something specifically about neurosurgery. For me, this has been my path in life and the narrative that I found, and the one that's made sense of all of this for me. It's not the only one, and I'm sure I could have had others. So this is a quote from Marcus Aurelius. Live a good life. If there are gods and they are just, then they will not care how devout you've been, but will welcome you based on the virtues you've lived by. If there are gods but unjust, then you should not want to worship them. If there are no gods, then you'll be gone, but will have lived a noble life that will live on in the memories of your loved ones. A noble man compares and estimates himself by an idea which is higher than himself, and a mean man by one lower than himself. The one produces aspiration, the other ambition, which is the way in which a vulgar man aspires. Again, these are ones that will hopefully become more sensibly connected as I move on. This is from William James, from his book, The Varieties of Religious Experience. The whole universe of concrete objects, as we know them, swims in a wider and higher universe of abstract ideas that lend it its significance. As time, space, and the ether soak through all things, so we feel do abstract and essential goodness, beauty, strength, significance, justice, soak through all things good, strong, significant, and just. Our normal waking consciousness, rational consciousness as we call it, is but one special type of consciousness. Whilst all about it, parted from it by the flimsiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. We may go through life without suspecting their existence, but apply the requisite stimulus, and at a touch, they are there in all their completeness. Definite types of mentality, which probably somewhere have their field of application and application. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded. How to regard them is the question, for they are so discontinuous with ordinary consciousness. Yet they may determine attitudes though they cannot furnish formulas, and open a region through which they fail to get a map. At any rate, they forbid a premature closing of our accounts with reality. This is from the psychologist Thomas Satz. People often say this or that person has not yet found himself. Self is not something one finds, it's something one creates. So keep those all in mind. So I'm going to give you a few hypotheses. This is going to be the foundation for my talk. So we're each of us given a finite time on this earth. This is one of the defining things of what it is to be human. It is to be mortal. For those of you who've read the philosophy of Heidegger, you know that his whole foundation of thinking is frankly driven by this reality of our existence, that's mortality, and the fact of having in each of our moments to come to terms with that. Our existence is pervaded by its temporality and by sorrow and loss. Within this, the self is an enigma. We all seek satisfaction and wholeness, and I'll argue that that is what is meant by the word virtue. I will also argue that duty is a path to virtue and is an opportunity for transcendence, which is an experience that allows expansion of the self beyond the strictures of its own interest and limits. In Vedic philosophy, this is called darshana. What I will hope to suggest to you is that, at least for me, the practice of neurosurgery has been a practical meditation on the good life. So Heidegger states that wholeness depends upon authenticity. And this is a complicated and fraught word. What's that mean? So as cognitive creatures, we're responsible for and capable of defining our own identities. What I'm going to claim is that authenticity is something that can be found in virtue, that virtue is something that we can find through duty, and that duty, more than anything in our experience of being human, is what defines our identity and being. So the American Heritage Dictionary defines virtue as the quality of moral excellence, righteousness, and responsibility, a specific type of moral excellence or other exemplary quality that is considered meritorious or a worthy practice or ideal. The dictionary of philosophy goes a little further and says that virtue is the state of a thing which constitutes its peculiar excellence and enables it to perform its functions well. Both of these are wrapped up in what Aristotle would say, which is the goodness of a thing consists in it realizing its form, as if it has an essential nature that it's striving to fulfill. And that's the purpose and fulfillment of that thing. He described a state called eudaimonia, which is the objective state of happiness or flourishing. The Oxford philosopher Alistair MacIntyre actually stated that there are 3 stages of virtue. So the first he intertwined in the concept of practice. So to use his words, a practice involves standards of excellence and obedience to rules, as well as the achievement of goods. To enter into a practice is to accept the authority of those standards and the inadequacy of my own performance as judged by them. It's to subject my own attitudes, choices, preferences, and tastes to the standards which currently and partially define the practice. I'll make the point that there's a lot of language here that I think many of us might feel immediately to be antagonistic to the idea of selfhood or identity, right? All of this is looking external. But he states virtue is a learned quality of human beings that's necessary to achieve goods internal to practice. So it is by necessity a socially defined entity. So then he speaks about the narrative concept of selfhood. That selfhood is something that is constructed through a unity of experience. That individual episodes and decisions derive their meaning and significance only when it's in the context of this broader narrative. In other words, otherwise, all life is continuous experience. All of us depend on this work of creating a narrative to actually make sense of those experiences. And then finally, he talks about moral education, which is the quest for human good that's sought from a vantage point of the moral tradition. Again, this idea that to find virtue means positing ourselves as individuals within a broader context. So why am I saying all this and thinking about what it is to live a good life? So Aristotle said that we should all seek this goal of Yusheng, which is living well. But the purpose of a human is to live in consonance with the rational soul. And that happiness is not a virtue, but is the result of virtue. A quote from John Wooden, who won more championships at the collegiate level than unfortunately I did. Adversity is the state in which man most easily becomes acquainted with himself. The philosopher W.D. Ross created these notions, and many of you will recognize these as being implicit in the way we understand medical ethics. But he identified these duties that are integral to how we constitute ourselves from Aristotle's ethics. And he noticed these as things that are actually the critical elements of what it is that makes human beings not only social individuals, but that actually give us some structure ourselves. Fidelity, which is the duty to keep promises. Reparation, which is the duty to compensate others when we harm them. Justice, which is the duty to recognize merit. Beneficence, the duty to improve the conditions of others. Self-improvement, which is the duty to improve ourselves, our own virtue and intelligence. Non-malfeasance, the duty not to injure others. And gratitude, the duty to thank those who help us. So all of that is just kind of a foundation for these two stories I'll share with you today. Does anyone recognize this by chance? So this is a painting by Caravaggio called The Sacrifice of Isaac. And you see Abraham here about to kill his son. I suspect most of you are familiar with this story, but I'll go through it just briefly for those of you who aren't. So this is a story from the Hebrew Old Testament. And Abraham has been promised by Yahweh, by God, that he will be the father of God's people. And he's gone into old age, and he and his wife Sarah have not been able to conceive a child. And in her 90th year, she conceives and gives birth to this boy, Isaac. You can imagine the joy that it must have been to be a father who's been told by his God, you will be the father to my people, and to have a child at the age of 90. And when Isaac was a young boy, Abraham is told by God, Abraham, you must go to the mountain, and there you will find a way to sacrifice your son. And my son is 9. I have not been told by God that I will be the father of his people, thankfully, but I can only imagine the horror of what this could have been to hear this. And the weight of what it would have been to hear this. And Abraham, believing in his God, takes Isaac to the mountain and is about to sacrifice him. And the story is remarkable. It is a beautiful piece of literature that as his arm is raised with the knife, the angel of the Lord stops him and says, Abraham, what are you doing? How could you be doing this? Look, there's an animal for sacrifice. Leave your son alone. It's one of these amazing moments in the Old Testament where not only does God completely reverse himself, but rebukes the person who he's reversing himself to while doing so. So I bring this up because of the importance this has for the philosopher Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard recognized this moment when Abraham has been asked to sacrifice his son as the resonant meaning of faith. And I will tell you that I'm telling you this story as someone who does not, unfortunately, have the joy of faith. But the resonance of this is something that I can fully feel. Kierkegaard says that there are 2 critical aspects to what Abraham does. The first is resignation. The fact that he is willing to give up all hope, all joy, because of this demand from his God. It's this willingness to duty. that's remarkable. The other, though, is what Kierkegaard said, must have been some element of hope. This idea that even with the knife raised, Abraham must in his heart have believed that he would not lose his son and that his God would not lie to him. And it's only in that dual moment of both that we can believe that Abraham still could somehow have these double roles to his son and to his God. This may be a story that less of you are familiar with. So this is a painting by the 20th century Indian master, M.E. Hussain, called Arjuna and the chariot. And I will tell you this story as well. So this story comes from the Indian epic, the Mahabharata. And many of you may have heard of the Bhagavad Gita, which is actually just one small chapter within the scope of the whole of the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata tells the story of essentially a dynastic clan battle of legacy. So there are two groups of brothers who have claim to the same throne. And the two go to war. It's an 18-day war in which hundreds of thousands die in order to achieve the throne. But as the battle's about to begin, there's a break in the story to allow a dialogue between Arjuna, who is one of the princes and the greatest warriors, the greatest of all the warriors there, and his charioteer, who happens to be Krishna, the incarnation of God. And the dialogue begins with the armies lined up against each other. And Arjuna, who again is the greatest warrior of all of them, looks across the battlefield and sees his family and his teachers and his friends, and suddenly thinks, how can I fight? And he asks Krishna to take him into the middle of the battlefield, and he drops his bow. And he says to Krishna, I can't go forward. And they begin a dialogue in which Krishna says to him that the way to be truest to himself is to fulfill what he calls his Dharma, to essentially fulfill his duty. And that in doing his duty, he will not have any weight of blame for this discretion that he has to take against these people who he looks across at and sees as his family and friends and teachers. And I'm sorry, I'm truncating this story terribly. But it's to speak to a commonality between these two narratives. And it's worth saying that here are two narratives that are really fundamental to two tremendous, or three tremendous, or four tremendous faiths, right? So there's something very fundamentally human about this need to somehow find some reconciliation to the imperfection of every decision that we have to make in front of us. So this idea of Dharma, some of you may know, it's this idea that all of us have a duty in our identity. And it's a word that is fraught because it's difficult for it not to seem like a passive prescription for conduct. If you're born into a particular place in life, you guys all know the word caste or the term caste, but if you're born into a particular identity, that's the identity that you must fulfill. What I will argue instead is that what these teachers from so long ago were trying to convey to us was an understanding of a critical ethical stance that's not dissimilar to what Kierkegaard was trying to teach us in telling us about the story of Abraham and Isaac, and in Heidegger's idea of authenticity, which is an attempt to make sense of right action in the scope of the challenging complexity of human life and decisions. So go back to what I was saying before, that we are all of us living a life that is bound in time and coursing through our experience of life is a continuous experience of sorrow and loss. How do you find meaning in that? How do you find integrity in that? How do you find virtue in that? So I'm going to come to this other term, transcendence. So transcendence can mean something of grandeur, right? Surpassing others, preeminent or supreme. And I'm not so interested in that idea of transcendence. Transcendence can also mean lying beyond the ordinary range of perception. And this gets a little bit to those initial quotes that I was giving you by William James. We, all of us, and I mean, all of us here particularly, live in a life that is dominated by a narrative of science, of objectivity. Right? That's what it means to live in the 21st century, is to privilege the scientific understanding of our reality beyond any other. It is hokey pokey to speak like William James about modes of perception, modes of consciousness that go beyond this subjectivity, or this, I'm sorry, this objectivity. And I will argue instead that all of you have been there before, right? You've all been in that place where you feel some connection to something beyond yourself, where you are overcome by the beauty of all of this, where it is so clear that the world is more than our limited selves. Right? Think to those moments. And they may have involved time with friends, they may have involved looking at a piece of art, listening to music. We've all had those moments. I will tell you, these moments of insight between what philosophers will call the phenomenal and the noumenal, what James would have called the mystical consciousness. These are moments of rapture during which we escape the confines of ourselves and achieve connection to something greater. And I would tell you, I would say that these are moments in which we're enraptured by the beauty that is even within our temporality, within our mortality, within our loss. The philosopher Martin Hagelin has said this beautifully. The inherent risk of failure, withering, and death does not testify to a lack of being. Rather, the finitude of flourishing is an essential part of why we are devoted to making flourishing actual and keeping it alive. A form of life that's not embodied in mortal could not fulfill our desire to lead free lives, since it would not be a form of life at all. These are all very oblique ways of speaking to the importance of finding what it is that allows you that rapture, that allows you these moments of transcendence beyond the smallness of what each of us is. I bring up duty and virtue because for me, the art and practice of doctoring, and specifically for me, the art and practice of being a neurosurgeon has allowed me access to those moments of rapture. Harvey Cushing, who's the father of neurosurgery, said this: while ours is perhaps the most arduous and responsible of the many surgical specialties, we can have the satisfaction of knowing that only men of a certain type will venture to make it their life work, and that so far at least, both in this country and abroad, its devotees have shown not only the kind of sympathetic and encouraging interest in one another's activities that binds them closer together, but have at the same time held the respect of the profession as a whole. I will ask all of you to look for something in life that is bigger than yourselves, something to give yourself to, and something to devote yourself to. For me, it's this sense of duty that has given me a release from the weight of being. And I've talked about this really obliquely, but hopefully it has made sense in kind of a whole. And I'll leave you with this. This is, I think, what we have recorded as the beginning of human philosophy, but my suspicion is from the drawings in southern France from many thousand years before this, that human beings have been contemplating what this means for much longer even than Socrates. So one of the joys of being in academia, one of the joys of having an academic life, of being in neurosurgery, has been the people that it's allowed me to meet. These are obviously people who will not mean anything to you, but who I want to thank because I get to. My mentor in neurosurgery was a gentleman named Hunt Bager, who's now retired, but was the chair of neurosurgery at Northwestern and at the University of Toronto, University of Texas Southwestern. I spoke a lot of what you heard tonight. I've spoken with Karen Devon, who's one of my colleagues here at the University of Toronto, Dan Smith, who's a dear friend of mine at Harvard Divinity School, and Rajam Raghunathan, who's a colleague of mine at the University of Ottawa. I spoke about these issues with Sharon Krichik from the Department of Philosophy at Hebrew University and with Cornell West, who's now at the Union Theological Seminary, and I owe a great amount to the two of them for how much they've given me. And my wife, Bobby Reddy Doss, who's been my partner through all of this. And this is my mentor. This is H.D. Cameron, who is a professor of classics at the University of Michigan, and who I met when I was 17, and who started me along a path towards these sorts of questions that I just would not have come to otherwise. So with that, I'll end, and I will take any questions that you might have.
Wow, that was such a interesting and thought-provoking lecture, Dr. Doss. I actually learned a lot. There was a bit of the details, some of the stories that you had mentioned, I've have heard before, but there were some details that you mentioned that actually provoked a lot of good thought. So thank you for that. So yeah, I guess at this time, maybe we can open the floor. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to either type it in the chat, but we encourage you if you could open up your mic and engage in the discussion.
Thanks, Peter. I have to say hello to Shelley Wang, who's one of my neurosurgical children. So Shelley, hello.
Dr. Doss, how are you? I couldn't miss this. When I heard about it, I had to sign up because I'm a pediatric neurosurgeon now, so I'm attending neurosurgeon in Miami. But when I was a resident, I learned a lot from Dr. Das, both in terms of clinical decision making, in addition to surgical operations. And also I had the extraordinary pleasure of being able to listen to his philosophy when we were operating in the OR. And he was always such a pleasure to listen to that I couldn't miss the chance. So thank you. That was a really, really great, really, really great presentation. Thank you.
I have a question. I'll maybe begin the conversation. So, Dr. Das, when we think about our senses of identity, right? I mean, the way that I thought about it is more, we define our identity in relation to other people, things, and events, and in a way, it sort of merges our sense of selfhood with others in a way that I think, at least, that there's no boundary between us and others, and if the bond is meaningful and whatnot. Do you think we have a duty to continue that sense of identity to transcend, or do you think that despite the obstacles and the suffering, one should let go of that?
Thanks, Saman. So I will say the philosophy that I have found as a meaningful guide to thinking about this question all posits the idea of selfhood as something that necessarily is social. It's always relational, right? And that's it's interesting. I think external to philosophy, it's easy to think about this kind of stereotypic creature that lives in isolation and just reads books all the time and is self-sustaining in that way. But I think, again, the notions of self-construction of identity that I found most resonant are all ones that talk about that process being one that we mediate with others, and that end that we reach as being one that's necessarily social.
Thank you.
I can jump in. So I guess I'm interested in, I've heard a lot of connections between maybe the wellness and burnout literature, or at least that's what I'm seeing. I have the belief that a lot of people go into medical school kind of in search of a purpose or a passion and are interested in these kind of things. And I wonder if at some point it kind of gets squashed out of people, whether it's the systems or, the way that they are and the reality of practice, and things are just so busy. And maybe a part of it is whether that's kind of taking on an identity of medicine or, the hidden curriculum. So I was just wondering if you could speak to that, and if that is the case, is there anything we could do to change education, or I dare say change the system to allow people to connect to this aspect of the work more?
Yeah, that's a great question, Susan. Thank you. I think the fact that burnout is as prevalent as it is in medicine speaks to an innate problem in our culture as it is now, right? It's interesting. So there are a couple things I think of immediately. So first, I met with our incoming 5 residents earlier this morning, and we met to talk about the curriculum that they're going to be going through, which is now competence by design, and kind of what that will look like. And I felt it necessary to make the point to them in welcoming them to Toronto, to simply tell them how much joy it is that I found in this work, how much meaning I have found in it, and to tell them to try to remember that as they're going through the hardship of what residency is. And it is difficult when you are in the muck of the work itself to remember what it is that is joyous about it, and to often forget what it is that led you to choose it in the first place. And I'll say this to all of you, right? You're at that point where hopefully you are not severely jaded by what it is that you've gone through so far. It is difficult not to. I'm currently kind of in dialogue with a prior student of mine who's now a psychiatry resident. And we're in dialogue with the goal of writing a paper essentially on what we think may be some of the underlying causes of burnout. And the place that she and I find ourselves continuously coming back to is wondering if part of the reason why we fatigue in doing this work is that we don't actually allow ourselves to feel the sorrow of our patients, to go through their struggles, that we actually create a distance between ourselves and them. It is remarkably humanizing to practice medicine. It forces you into a proximity with people and with the experience of living that, Cindy, there are very few other ways in life that you're going to see this in the same way. The intimacy that it requires of you with people who are complete strangers is remarkable. And I think it's actually worth being honest about that and remembering that as a reason why we all decided on this. And I think a lot of people are actually, when they get to that point, scared of the weight of it and feel a need to be distanced from it. And I don't want to say that as if I'm blaming people who are suffering from burnout from allowing themselves to have a lived experience with their patients. But for me, at least, having that lived experience with my patients has, I think, been probably the primary safeguard against burnout. I'm a cancer doctor. I lose people every day. For me, the grief of that has been a tremendous source of meaning. And I'm not sure which of my mentors gave me the right to kind of allow myself that closeness to people. But for me, I think that's the only reason I can do what I do. I don't actually think that I could have emotionally managed doing this work if I didn't allow myself to be emotionally hurt by it. I'd say the same as a trainee. You will be in a position where you have time with people that will be remarkably rich because of the moments that they're in that requires you to be with them. I would argue that, again, I think this isn't so far away from Saman's question. What does it mean for us to create an identity for ourselves? I think identity is not something you form for yourself in a box. It's something that you form because of the reflection you see in someone else.
Professor Das, I have actually a similar question along the same lines. I'm wondering, for yourself, and I definitely understand this could be, personal to a degree, so feel free to answer, how you wish. But I'm wondering, how do you, utilize your philosophy to, push past grief when, for example, a patient on, in a devastating situation, they lose their life for, for some reason, for whatever reason, how do you get past grief, or how do you, find the motivation to, continue to do what you do?
Thanks, Pedro. So, for those of you who have read philosophy, I think most of us go to philosophy with the hope of finding something there that gets us closer to having an understanding of this world that we live in. And I think that's why most of us keep reading philosophy, because we're still looking for something that actually gives us some insight into what it is that this world that we're living in. I don't know that there's anything that I've found that I could say is a self. I will say the one thing that philosophy has given me is a scope of just the distance that you get by the fact of not only living, but then watching yourself living, if that makes sense. In a way, this is what philosophy is. It's philosophy is a form of knowledge in which we watch ourselves living and try to make sense of it, right? And I don't think that there's anything I can say I found in philosophy that has made the watching suffering any lesser. But perhaps it has given me just some perspective to be able to see it in, again, something that's bigger than just the moment of itself. I had a student ask me once whether studying literature made me a better doctor. And, I used to say, when people would ask me that, that in literature, I learned how to do close reading. Right? That's one of the first things that you learn. And that learning how to do close reading in fiction prepared me for the close reading that's involved in being a physician, in understanding what it is that you're hearing and constructing a meaningful narrative from that story. And I do think that's true. I interestingly do think that there's something about literary criticism that does prepare you for taking a good history. But I think what I would say now is, for me, studying literature brought this remarkable realm of the beauty of existence into my life. It just made my life richer. Just like music has, and just like film has, and just like my children have, right? Does that make me a better doctor? It makes me a wealthier human being. I don't mean in a fiscal way, right? And maybe that makes me a better doctor. I don't know. But it certainly has left me with a breadth of the world that I'm grateful for. That's a long way of not answering your question. I don't know.
No worries at all. No, that was amazing. Thank you.
for the 7 years that I was a neurosurgery resident, I was not able to read a single novel. I was too tired. I was too tired all the time. But I listened to a lot of music. I read a lot of poetry. I tried to watch film. I'd fall asleep in 3 seconds of it being a dark room. But those are all things that are part of my life now. Right? I end every evening, unless I'm operating, I end every evening reading fiction or reading history or letting myself have a moment of something other than this.
Dr. Das, I completely agree. I think neurosurgical residency was a really grueling experience, and it's really nice to be able to have time to decompress a little bit and just reflect back on your experiences as a neurosurgeon, as a human being. I think on that note, I wanted to ask you, and obviously you mentioned quite a few very prominent philosophers in your talk, but if you were to recommend a couple of philosophy texts or other literature for the audience, what do you think would be, some really important pieces to look into?
Thanks, Shelley. So, I think because we are who we are, right? We're all thinking about these things from the scope of our lives in medicine. I think there are some remarkable guides who would resonate, I think, for all of you. So if you haven't, please find time to read Paul Cathani's book. If you have read Henry Marsh, again, I would move you to read his work. I think, who else? Sonia has put in the notes Kierkegaard's book, Fear and Trembling, which is the book from which I spoke to his understanding of Abraham and Isaac. It's a dense piece, but only about 100 pages long or so. It took me about 3 months to read those 100 pages, so I fear and tremble anytime I suggest it to someone. But it's, Shelley, I feel lucky for having been lost in my way and rambling before I got to where I am. It's hard because it just so happened to work that way for me. And I can make sense of it narratively now and say to all of you, well, this led to this, led to this, led to this. And the reality is it was just kind of by accident. And so it's hard to be prescriptive based on that. I would definitely not recommend it as a course for most people trying to get to neurosurgery. But I would use those two as entrees into just thinking about these broader questions. My suspicion is the fact that you guys are here tonight probably means that you guys are asking these questions already to some degree already. So I think those two sources would probably give you more of a language to think about it with.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your wisdom as always. And obviously I find it always such a pleasure and such a joy being able to listen to you. So
thank you, Shelley.
Dr. Das, just a quick question, probably very brief. Were you perceived as being contrarian in the sense that, your training and background may have not been what would have been common for someone to pursue medicine and then academically do research? And did that ever bother you, if at all?
Great. Yeah. So No, I'll say I was very lucky. And I've always been very lucky the fact of my having studied literature, the fact of my having studied philosophy, that these were never seen as things that were derivative to the rest. Saman, I mean, I'll say that I can't sell myself as an individual who is particularly renegade, right? I mean, I took in the end a pretty measured path as a clinician scientist towards an academic world, right? So in that sense, I don't know that I can say, well, like I've been forgiven all the rest. But I will say that I really feel remarkably lucky that within this identity, I've been allowed to pursue so many other things that mean a lot to me. So the fact that the University of Toronto, that the Department of Surgery has not only allowed, but encouraged me to also be a member of the Center for Ethics, it's been tremendous for me. It's been a great source of joy. And I very easily could have had a chair who would have said to me, you know, this is a waste of time. You should write another grant. And I'm very fortunate that I didn't. And I will say, I have had the great luck of growing in my career under the auspices of a chair who said, you know what, we need not only a track for people who are clinician scientists, not only for clinician educators, that we need a tenure track for people who are clinician ethicists. We need a tenure track for people who are clinician global health practitioners. We need a track for people who are clinician entrepreneurs. I mean, this is, you know, one of the difficulties of academic, not only medicine, but academia in general has been one, the inability to allow people to wander at all off track. And the second has been this notion that when we succeed, it's a singular success, right? In academic medicine, that means that a paper only means something if you're the first or the last author. And I'm hopeful that these are two things that are changing. That one of the things that has happened, I mean, I look at all of us here, but one of the things that's happened as more of us in medicine are women, as more of us in medicine are people of color, I think we've migrated a bit away from that sort of prescriptiveness of saying that there is a particular identity that is what it is that we can celebrate. And from believing that science or any sort of success or development or progress in medicine is singular. When I do meaningful research now, it's with massive teams, right? Because frankly, that's how we find things that are interesting. So if everyone has to be the last author, we're not going to make it anywhere, right? If that's our model of success, we're in trouble. So again, I don't know if it's mistaken for me to see this evolution in academia as tethered to the diversification of what academia looks like, but I do think that the two are linked to each other. But it's changed. And again, I've been very fortunate that my very white, very male chair has encouraged me in every weird thing that I've decided that I need to do. Off track, I'll say, off track thing that I've ever needed to do. Are you guys all in medical school other than Shelley? Everyone here?
I think most of us are, yeah.
I I will tell you, it is at times overbearing to be in medical school, right? I mean, you guys are learning. The way I would put it is you are learning a new language and enculturating to a new society. Like that's what it means to be coming into medicine. My children go to a French school, and I don't speak French. My children are fluent, right? But it's something that they've been immersed in from the time that they were young kids. We are asking you guys to learn how to be members of a new society, a new civilization that is foreign to all of you, right? And you have 2 years of book and 2 years of people study to enculturate yourselves into it. It's a lot. And I remember when I was going through it, it felt like a lot. I will say it, again, all I can speak to is the unbelievable joy that I have found in the work of doctoring, in this duty of this identity. It's been unbelievable. I feel frankly grateful for it to some God that I can't believe in, right? But I will tell you, there's nothing special about me that I don't expect each of you to be able to find that same unbelievable joy in it. And I hope you do. And I hope you all come into neurosurgery, but that's neither here nor there.
Actually, Professor, that's something about that. Do you have any advice or any suggestions you'd like to share with those of us who are, heading towards or who will be starting clerkship this year, or starting to take electives in potentially neurosurgery and related fields? Do you have any suggestions or advice that you could share with us?
Yeah. So first of all, I will tell you that again, just remembering for myself, it's not easy to be a third-year medical student. It's a new identity to have. It's a new world to be in. You often feel clumsy. You often feel like you're bumbling, and that's okay. That's part of transitioning to this new world. I think to the patients that I took care of as a third-year medical student, and I remember being a third-year medical student and being given one patient, and my whole day was devoted to simply one patient. And the result of that was that I got to spend more time with patients when I was a third-year medical student than frankly I have at any other time since in my career. And the people I took care of as a third-year medical student, I still remember for that reason vividly. I hope that the same will be the case for you guys, and enjoy it. Again, you will. The worst part of being a third-year medical student is that you feel as if you have no actual value to anything, right? Like you're just redundant to the whole rest of the team. What I will tell you is that's not the case, that you actually are a resource for the team. No one on the team will be able to give your patient time the way that you will be able to. Right? That's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I would say is there'll be so much that you'll see that is new to you and novel. Read about it. Use it as your chance to grow as a doctor, which is what you're becoming, right? This is just a step in there. The third thing is I would ask you guys to keep an open mind. I came into my third year of med school confident that I was going to become a psychiatrist. And I had no inclinations toward neurosurgery or surgery at all. And my first rotation was on psychiatry, and I had a fantastic time. And I had remarkable mentors as residents and staff, and the experience was unbelievable. And I felt the same way through many of my rotations. And when I got to neurosurgery, I felt something utterly bewildering that the only other time I felt was when I first met my wife. And I don't know what else to say other than that. It was clear to me that it was what I had to do. And it wasn't even what I wanted to do. It was what I had to do. I don't know that you have to have that experience, right? You don't have to be slapped in the face by what it is that is right for you. But be open to the possibility that you might. And it may not be what you expected, and be open to it. I will say also that for me, the people I met who were residents and staff, the people I met who I thought to myself, this is what it means to be a doctor. This is, when I think of who I want to be as a doctor, this is the person who comes closest to that. Those people, frankly, meant as much to me as I was trying to find my way and make those decisions as any experience within the thing itself.
Thank you so much. Any questions from anyone else?
I actually have a question, if you don't mind. Hi, Dr. Daz.
Long time no see.
I was actually just wondering, you described falling in love with neurosurgery like it was a slap in the face. But I think, for those who are still like very early on in their career or who haven't really gotten a chance to shadow much because of COVID, it's really hard to tell whether, we're going to find our passion for medicine. So can you kind of tell us what exactly it was about neurosurgery that really enticed you? And you said, you were really interested in psychiatry. What was it that tipped that balance over?
Thanks, Sonia. So, it wasn't the lack of feeling that excitement in psychiatry. My psychiatry rotation was on an inpatient psychiatric ward. I had this remarkable resident named Dorothy Grunis, who's now a psychodynamic psychotherapist in Chicago, and this amazing staff person named Peter Alahi, who was this young, energetic schizophrenia researcher. And my time on that unit was amazing. I had a similar experience on neurology, which was my next rotation, and had an amazing resident who's now staff at WashU, and had as my mentor a gentleman by the name of Nick Vick, who was a medical neuro-oncologist and a remarkable human being. What is it about neurosurgery that grabbed me? I started my neurosurgery rotation with a friend of mine named Dan Barnes, who wanted to go into neurosurgery. And we showed up the first day, and we've been told, come to the neuro ICU at 5:30. It was clear that when we got there, the team had already been rounding for about 45 minutes. So at 5:30 in the morning. And that day I stayed in the hospital until about 10. And they said, all right, we'll see you tomorrow at 4:45. And I thought to myself, fuck, what have I done? What have I done? And by the end of the month, my friend Dan had decided these people are crazy. And Dan is now a general surgeon in St. Louis. And I wish I could say what it was that didn't let me go. And I'm still trying to figure that out. On my rotation, there were two residents. One was a PGY3 named Chancelet, and the other was a PGY5 named Bernard Bendar. Bernard is now the chair of neurosurgery at Mayo in Arizona. And they were remarkable. And my second night on my rotation, I took call with Sean. And he did not stop moving the whole night. Any of you who've rotated on neurosurgery know what a night on call in neurosurgery is like. It never stopped. And despite the fact that it never stopped, he showed me every film. He went through every case with me. He had me doing a lumbar puncture while he was standing next to me. It was remarkable. Within the scope of that 10 hours with him, it was clear to me that whatever I did, if I could be a resident the way that Sean was a resident, I could be happy with myself. And I finished that month and I thought to myself, God, that was miserable. I'll just do one more month. And I finished that month as a fourth year student and I thought, God, that was miserable. I'll just do one more month. And I remember I was struggling trying to think what it is that I should do. And my wife said to me, my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, said to me, you can always quit, right? You can always decide this isn't the right thing. And you walk away. And there's no shame in that. And it was essentially her giving me permission to put myself and by extension her through the suffering of what residency is. And every day of residency, I thought to myself, what am I doing? This is terrible. And the next morning I came. And I'll tell you, I still wonder to myself, what am I doing? And I might at some point find an answer to that question that would make me think tomorrow I want to do something different than today. But I doubt it. I have a very particular identity in neurosurgery. I'm a cancer doctor. That's what I do. This will resonate with Shelley. So my week so far, on Monday, I spent the whole day in the operating room with a woman who had an olfactory groove meningioma that was about 6 centimeters in diameter, who had been found to have the tumor because of right eye visual loss. And for 10 hours of that procedure, I was tachycardic, I'm quite sure. Right? It can physiologically have been good. On Tuesday clinic, yesterday I had 2 cases of patients with recurrent malignant disease. I think I have colleagues for whom the magic of surgery isn't real anymore. What do I mean by that? This woman on Monday, who I took to surgery, had a massive tumor. And I did the case with my chief. And for 11 hours, the two of us were together in a world where really it was just the two of us having this continuous dialogue while we were doing this work. And the work involved peeling the tumor off the optic nerves and off the anterior cerebral arteries and off the internal cerebral arteries and opening the optic canal and cutting the falciform ligament and removing tumor from the optic nerve distally. And there's a remarkable beauty to the work of that. And part of the beauty of it is that on Monday it went well, and the next morning this woman told me her vision was better, and the next morning she went home. And that has no relevance at all to the next time that I have to do this. That the next time that I have to do this, the success of the last time offers me nothing to the demand for success again. And there's something I find amazing in that. I find amazing in that. I wouldn't have expected this idea of the surgery to be mystifying to me or to be a moment of transcendence for me. I wouldn't have expected it, but it is. It's something I'm awed by. I also think about the place that I get to have in life with these people I take care of and who I shepherd. I listed on my thanks Dan Smith, who's the head minister at the United Church of Christ in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Dan's one of my best friends. He was a divinity student when I was a graduate student in philosophy. Dan's a minister, and we use in talking about ministers this idea of shepherding their flock. And I think about the role that he has in walking with people as they go through the sorrow of life. And I think what we do as doctors as critically is just that. It is simply the remarkable duty of sitting with a patient when they're suffering. There are very few people in life who have that honor of meaningfully sitting next to another human being like that. You will. Again, none of these things necessarily speak to neurosurgery. And my suspicion is that I could have gone into nephrology and found kind of this sort of grandeur in it as well. But I'm pretty sure that it was identifying these things as what it was that was really critical to me about what it means to be a doctor, what it is that I wanted out of this sacrifice of life that it means to be in medicine. That these were the critical parts of it, and that's probably much of the reason why I do what I do, that I'm a cancer doctor and a neurosurgeon, is that I found those things in it.
Thank you so much for that beautiful answer. And I really hope that, you know, as you continue to work, you're thinking less so that I just got to make it another month, and more so like, so thank you again, Dr. Das.
Okay, thank you so much. Is there any other question? Maybe as a last question. Okay, if there's no other question, Dr. Das, could you please give us the final word of wisdom? I know we have a lot to digest, a lot to think about. That was amazing, inspiring talk. But do you have any like final word of wisdom for us?
Yeah, well, thank you all of you for spending the evening with me. I hope if anything, I just gave you a sense of the specialness of what it is that you guys have decided on. It is easy to lose sight of the remarkable richness of what it is that you will do because of the work of it. And in those dark moments, try and remember this. I hope you find in it what I have.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was definitely a very insightful talk, and I think I'm pretty sure that everyone in this event like loved this talk. And thank you so much again for accepting to be with us this evening. And thanks to everyone else to also joining us for this event on CamSign. Hopefully, you had a fantastic night with Dr. Das Wisdoms. I just want to also mention that we have another event coming at CamSign coming soon on the 28th of June. That will be like a post-CARM panel. I would say that's really like maybe the biggest post-CARM panel in neurosurgery we have in Canada. We have about 10 to 11 incoming residents for neurosurgery. So if you like to know more about the CARM's application and their experience to get into a neurosurgery program, so please join us on 28th of June. So we're going to post all details for the event later on our website, and we would love to have all of you there. Yeah, I just want to thanks everyone again, and hope that you have you enjoy the rest of your evening. Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for coming, everyone. Hopefully we see you next time.